So we are closing in on the end of this series called Becoming Human in an Online World. Brian will wrap things up next week with the final sermon. But throughout this series, we have said every week that technology has the potential for good or for evil. It's about how we leverage it, right? And we've talked a lot about the potential negatives, obviously. So I thought I'd start today by sharing one of my favorite positives of technology. I'm the kind of person that maybe because of my age or I don't know. I have a pretty hefty wariness about advances in AI technology, but there is one area where I both use and completely love it. I love how Spotify's AI algorithm has totally nailed my taste in music. I'm going to give you a little peek into my Spotify Wrapped from 2024. This cracked me up, so I took some screenshots. Wanderlust Folky Americana. That's my genre, it says in March. And I was like, I can't really argue with that. If I walk into a record store and I see that on a sign, I'm going to go straight for that section. That's what I like. In February of 24. So there you go. As weird as those genre names are for me, I love this about Spotify, that they suggest new music and new artists to me that I haven't heard before because they just know that I might like them based on things I've listened to before. And there is one song in particular that the Spotify algorithm threw in one day, and I almost skipped it because it didn't really sound like the style that I like. And then I started listening to the words, and it has become an absolute godsend for me. It's written by a singer-songwriter named Ross King, who has been through a season of pretty intense grief recently in his own life, and he has an incredible knack for putting words to the complicated thoughts and feelings that I've been wrestling with as I've navigated my own layers of grief over the last few years. Now, I am not going to sing that song because I love you guys too much to subject you to that. I am not Brian or Jeremiah. I don't possess those skills. So I will just read you the first verse and chorus, and then after the gathering, you guys can look up the song. It's a really good one. I encourage you to do so. But it starts out like this. He says, I don't know what you've been through. I don't know what has been said or done to you, or how you arrived at your point of view. I don't know what's in your heart or who you really are. And I don't know if you feel loved, if your soul's been beaten down or lifted up. I've talked too much. I haven't listened enough to know what's in your heart or who you really are. And I don't know why we can't get along, or why we both think we are always right and never wrong. But I know God made both of us with love and wonder, and I know your heart matters just as much as mine. So any battle that I win against your flesh and blood and skin goes down as a defeat for humankind. The truth is, you're my neighbor, not my foe. So I'll try to love because there's so much that I don't know. That song has been the soundtrack of the last couple of years for me. And I've had it stuck in my head a lot this week, just singing it as I go about my day, as I was prepping for this message, because today I was tasked with talking about what it looks like to be a peacemaker in the online world. And that feels pretty daunting right now, doesn't it? Some days it feels like a pretty impossible task to be a peacemaker in our world. Which is why today's good news has been so good for my own soul over the last week or so, and I think it's so important for all of us. The polarization of our online world prizes judgment and unsolicited advice over kingdom values like humility and self-control. As we practice living and loving like Jesus, we will grow in wisdom and learn the posture of a peacemaker. Now, we're going to spend some time in the book of James today. James is a book that is notoriously full of practical and wise advice for how to live out our faith in everyday situations. And James has some helpful guidance for us on what it looks like to choose the posture of a peacemaker. He says, "Are any of you wise and understanding? Show that your actions are good with a humble lifestyle that comes from wisdom. However, if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, then stop bragging and living in ways that deny the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above. Instead, it is from the earth, natural and demonic. Wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there is disorder and everything that is evil. But what of the wisdom from above? First, it is pure, and then peaceful, gentle, obedient, filled with mercy and good actions, fair and genuine. Those who make peace sow the seeds of justice by their peaceful acts. I was thinking as I read over that passage several times prepping for this message about how when you set up a new social media account or like you join a group on Facebook or something, you always have to read and agree to their terms and conditions before you join, and their standards, rules of how to engage in the group. And I was thinking, like, this passage in James would make a really great set of terms of engagement before we engage and step out there with social media. Because according to James, if we want to become the kind of people who make peace, it boils down to whether our actions and our choices are guided by the wisdom from above versus the wisdom of the world around us. Remember the good news that we're talking about today. The polarization of our online world prizes judgment and unsolicited advice. That's the wisdom of our world. Over kingdom values like humility and self-control. That's the wisdom that comes from above. But as we practice living and loving like Jesus, we will grow in the kind of wisdom that comes from above. And we'll learn the posture of a peacemaker and be able to extend that to our world. And we're going to talk about 5 principles today that I think are really helpful to focus on as you're endeavoring to be a peacemaker in everyday situations. But before we dive into those, I think it's important that we note the difference between peacemaking and peacekeeping, because those are not the same idea. Peacemaking is hard work. It always takes longer than we think it's going to. It requires discipline, effort. We have to be willing to be uncomfortable and take action. It's a tough thing to navigate sometimes. It takes courage. Peacekeeping, on the other hand, is usually about trying not to make waves, just tiptoeing around, hoping it will all calm down on its own. Sometimes it involves subtly trying to manipulate other people or the situation so that we can control the environment and make sure that no one erupts. Peacekeeping may seem more peaceful in the moment, but it's a short-term win, always. It doesn't lead to the kind of real, lasting, deep peace that messy work of peacemaking can actually bring us. So we're going to dive into these 5 principles for peacemaking in an online world. And we got to start with this first one. We have to remember who we are. We start here so much of the time. In this case, we start by remembering our identity and calling as much loved children of God. In the Beatitudes, Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." When we're out there in the world actually practicing peacemaking, it becomes obvious who we belong to, that wisdom is coming from somewhere else. As God's child, we have access already to all that we need in him. Specifically, James reminds us that as his children, we have access to God's wisdom. And what does that wisdom look like? James says, first, it is pure. And then it's peaceful and gentle and obedient. It's filled with mercy and good actions. It's fair and it's genuine. There's just this deep peace and wisdom that we're able to embody when we're first rooted in God's love for us. And that provides the stable foundation and the peace we need in our own souls to be able to extend peace to other people and become peacemakers in our world. So we got to start by remembering who we are, and then we have to remember that there's a person behind the post. So with the exception of the bots, which I think we're all pretty good at recognizing at this point, there are real people on the other side of every contentious post or share or comments war that we see on any social media right now. And those real, actual human beings are people who are made in God's image, and they're just as deeply loved as you and I are. Remembering this is a really important foundation that helps us cultivate God's eyes and heart for those actual humans on the other side of the post. It lets us treat them the way that we want to be treated. We remember that this is a person, and how would we want to be treated if we're just out there thinking we're doing the right thing, right? So instead of jumping to label or condemn somebody online, we have the opportunity to practice giving them the benefit of the doubt. And I think a really good place to start is by assuming their intentions and their motives are as good as yours are. It may not be playing out that way at all, but most of the time when we engage, we're doing so for a reason. Most of the time, we think we're doing the right thing, and I wager to guess that the person on the other side of the post does too. So start by assuming that their intentions and motives are good. When we assume the best in someone, we extend an olive branch to them. We also give ourselves the opportunity to learn and to begin to see that person as a person and see how maybe their life experience, their perspective, led them to a place where they have strong conviction about an idea that are different from ours. And Brian's going to talk about that more next week. That's a really important message that you want to be here for. But in other cases, you may assume the best of someone and they end up proving that was not the case, that their intentions were not good. That does happen sometimes. And when it does, we do not use that opportunity to burn down their argument and them right along with it. This is the opportunity to exercise the wisdom from above. This is where we're able to say, God, I need your help to navigate how to interact with this real person that you love. Because God still loves and cares for them, even when they're being a jerk online. And that's really good news, because it means God still loves and cares for me, even when I'm being a jerk. And I'm really glad that's the case. Learning from Jesus how to treat others, even in their wrongness, that pushes back against the polarization we see in our online world that prizes things like judgment and unsolicited advice over kingdom values like humility and self-control. And as we begin practicing living and loving like Jesus, we begin to see other people as the real humans they are. We grow in God's wisdom, and we can take on the posture of a peacemaker with them. So we got to remember who we are. We got to remember who they are. And then we have to prioritize connection over correction. James says, are any of you wise and understanding? Show that your actions are good with a humble lifestyle that comes from wisdom. Man, I think we are so quick to want to jump to correct people online these days. There's this cartoon that's been rolling around the internet for a while. Can we see that? Do we have that one? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, the wife's like, are you coming to bed? He says, I can't, this is important. Gets us going. But jumping to correct someone every single time we smell a hint of wrong, that is the opposite of the humble lifestyle that comes from wisdom that James is talking about. And also, frankly, it's just really ineffective. Teddy Roosevelt famously said that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That sounds really trite and cute, but it's really true. Our correction only makes us feel superior, and it doesn't make an actual difference if the other person doesn't believe that we care about them first. We also earn the trust to be able to have the kinds of hard conversations that peacemaking requires of us when our actions have first shown people that we love and we care for them and we want good things for them. Frankly, this is a really difficult thing to do online. It might even be impossible. We talked about this more in week 2, but digital interactions cut us off from really important communication elements like body language and tone and feedback cues that help us convey to someone that we are for them, that we love them and we want good for them, and that's why we're willing to dive into hard conversations alongside them. The polarization of our online world is always going to prize judgment and unsolicited advice. That is correction prioritized over connection. But kingdom values like humility and self-control build connection with other people, and they help us embody the posture of a peacemaker. So our first 3 principles are mostly postural. They're about how we show up in interactions with others, online and elsewhere. It's how we embody God's love and God's peacemaking spirit. But our last 2, they're a little bit more practical and specific to the online world. And the next one, I'm going to be honest, could be kind of controversial, but I want you to just hear me out on this. I think peacemakers leverage unfollow, unfriend, and block as peacemaking tools, not as weapons for punishment. So those options, unfollow, unfriend, and block, they are there for a reason. It's important we have those available, but like everything else, they can be used for good or they can be used for evil, right? And wisdom from above, that helps us know how and when to leverage those to pursue healthy peacemaking instead of just pouring fuel on the fire. Now, it starts by, I think, us evaluating what our motives are for using them. When our cursor is like right there, our finger's right over the block button, we're ready to go. In verse 16, James says, wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there is disorder and everything that is evil. Those are some pretty strong words. But guys, if we're unfriending somebody on Facebook out of selfish motives, or just out of our own reactionary anger, it's going to lead to chaos and more drama. We have all seen this play out time and time again. There are entire subsets of the celebrity gossip industry that are just people detailing who unfollowed who and when and why and how it all went down. And I can safely say that I have never seen that lead to more peace. I don't think that is designed to lead us to peace. And because this is such a source of drama on the internet so much of the time, I think most of us haven't even considered that we might be able to leverage some of these tools to actually use them for good and to be a peacemaker in our world. Now, I will out myself here and say that I am a big fan of the unfollow feature on Facebook. Most social media, they may call it different things, but almost all platforms, they have something like this, where you're not unfriending somebody, you're not blocking them, you're just seeing less of what they post for either a defined period of time or indefinitely. I discovered the beauty of this feature over a decade ago during the Farmville craze. Does anybody else remember that? I've got some trauma there. I would get on there, and my feed would just be full of people updating me about their digital crops and livestock, and I was like, where is real life on here anymore? I don't see it. I had no idea how helpful being willing to unfollow someone's posts would become several years later. But these last few years, it's turned out to be a pretty helpful tool for me, as I've watched, often in shock and frustration and disbelief, as so many people that I knew in real life to be seemingly kind, wonderful people were falling into the polarization trap online. And they were posting things that just seemed so aggressive and out of tune with fruits of the Spirit, like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness. And what I began to notice, because I can't change them, right? But I began to notice that my perception of their posting habits was making it harder and harder for me to be able to hold a posture of love toward them in real life situations. I was losing my ability to practice that second principle and continue to see them as a real human being that God deeply loves and values. And when that happens, that's a big red flag, not about their posting so much as about what's going on in my own heart. So I have, in those moments, infrequently, but very intentionally, chosen to unfollow people so that I could preserve my ability to actually view them with love and kindness, to assume the best of them and not be weird when I run into them in Walmart, because that doesn't help anything. In these situations, it wasn't a safety issue that would require something like blocking, and I certainly didn't want to add fuel to the fire by just jumping to unfriend them. But choosing to unfollow and just not see their posts in my feed for a while was a decision that, for me, was rooted in wisdom from above. And it's helped me maintain the posture of a peacemaker and helped me view real humans in my life with love and to assume the best in them. Okay, final principle. Screen Sabbaths. Screen Sabbaths are so great because they can reset our perspective. Now, peacemaking, if we're going to commit ourselves to that kind of work online and in our real lives, it's a long game, guys. It's always full of twists and turns. Like I said before, it takes longer than we ever anticipate. And it is way too easy for us to start out with good intentions online and then find ourselves dragged into the gutter if we're never stepping away to ground ourselves in reality and to recenter on God's love and provision for us. If we have a regular rhythm of breaks from the online world, we're able to reset and remember that Jesus did not ultimately command us to be the moral police of the internet. Like, I get that impulse. Very much, I get that impulse. But what Jesus was pretty clear about is that we're to love our neighbor, including our enemies, which is the real hard work. I love the way the prophet Micah sums things up. He says, "He has told you, human one, what is good and what the Lord requires from you, to do justice, embrace faithful love, and walk humbly with your God." Guys, we don't have to be online every single minute to see every single post that's out there and get our opinion in there. And we definitely won't show up with the posture of a peacemaker if we haven't first experienced God's peace and rest in our own souls. Screen Sabbaths help us do that. They help us reconnect to God's provision for us, his peace, his rest, so that we can extend that to other people. We choose intentionally to regularly step away from the digital drama. And while we do that, we're practicing trusting God to be at work in us and in other people in ways that we can't. We rest in his goodness and we let him do the work in the world that only he can do. The polarization of our online world is always going to be there to prioritize things like judgment and unsolicited advice over kingdom values like humility and self-control. But when we're stepping away and we're recentering on God's love for us and his peace, we're able to live and love like Jesus and grow in wisdom and then step back into that arena with the posture of a peacemaker. And one of the most effective tools for practical peacemaking that we use around here is what we call the grace and truth matrix. If you've been around here long, you've probably seen a graphic like the one they're going to bring up here. Basically, the grace and truth matrix, the whole idea of it is that line represents our grace line. This horizontal line represents our truth line, and we can evaluate both of those independently. If we are low on both truth and grace, we are in what we call the checkout quadrant. We don't care about peacemaking here. We don't even want to see humans. So we are checked out. Now, if we are high on grace, but we're low on truth, we're in what's called the hangout quadrant. This is where we see that peacekeeping idea show up, where we're just trying to keep it light and easy and conflict-free, but we're not willing to have the hard conversations, and that ends up deferring conflict most of the time. And then the other extreme, we are high on truth, but low on grace. This is what we see a whole lot of on the internet. We call it the call-out posture. This is where we are just getting our opinion out there, and we are going to blast people with it. Consequences are what they are. But Jesus lived in what's called call in. Jesus was full of grace and truth. He could have really hard, really direct conversations with people, but full of so much grace and love that they deeply wanted to know more, that they knew that he was on their side. And if we're going to live and love like Jesus, if we're going to practice living as Jesus in our world and being an unstoppable source of his love that changes things, then we got to figure out where we are living in a posture that it doesn't look as much like Jesus and move toward grace and truth. The best way that I know to really deep dive into this is to be part of a Get Real group. So the next time you get an opportunity to be a part of that, I recommend that to literally everyone. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful experience and equipping opportunity. But we also have a shorter group experience, and we have one coming up later this spring that's focused specifically on using this Grace and Truth matrix. The Grace and Truth group is just 4 weeks, and it allows you to get some support while learning to practice this in real-life, ongoing situations that are happening to you. So if you have a situation in your life right now that is really requiring you to level up your peacemaking skills, I would highly, highly recommend that you look into being a part of one of those groups because it could be so helpful to you, so helpful. And guys, I know that when we're talking about something like peacemaking, we have basically only scratched the surface today. That's all we're really even able to do in this window of time. Given the state of our world right now, and the kind of heartbreaking headlines that are hitting our news feeds every single day at the moment, I will confess to you that I have struggled all week with how woefully incomplete this message might feel to some of you. It feels woefully incomplete to me sometimes too. And maybe you, like me, have been burdened by how monumental it seems right now to figure out how to be a peacemaker and to embody God's love when it seems like there are such gigantic cultural and societal and political issues playing out around us. Issues that desperately need God's transforming peace in our world. So if you walked in here like I did today, carrying a lot of heaviness in your soul over that, I just want to offer a couple of notes to you that have been helpful to me over the past week or two. First of all, Jesus, he had a whole lot to say about what it looks like to be a peacemaker in seemingly impossible situations. A lot of his best wisdom on that shows up in what's called the Sermon on the Mount. We spent a year and a half walking through that entire sermon, verse by verse, a few years back, and all those messages are always available online. I have revisited them many times when I needed to reground in that truth. And I think that, I want to encourage you, that could be an encouragement to you to go back through there. It could provide some additional wisdom and guidance that we're not able to do in an hour of talking about peacemaking. Secondly, we've already acknowledged it, but we couldn't possibly cover everything there is to say about peacemaking in one message. We'd be here all month, and we'd never actually get out and do the work of peacemaking, which is definitely not the point. It's been helpful to me to remember that the title of this series is Becoming Human in an Online World. We are each trying to let God guide us, let Jesus guide us to what it looks like to be human in the way of Jesus, in the reality of our online world. And so our focus today is on what that means for us as individuals, to take responsibility for our own spiritual formation and to begin to learn from Jesus how to become people of peace. And I feel pretty confident that if all of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus committed ourselves to that kind of work, I believe we'd begin to see the tides of those bigger societal issues turn. When God's people started showing up everywhere, their homes, their work, their communities, with a posture of peacemaking. And I think James would back me up on that theory. The final verse of our scripture passage today is one that I've just been returning to over and over this week. It's been giving me a whole lot of hope. He ends that passage by saying, "Those who make peace sow the seeds of justice by their peaceful acts." Ultimately, God cares more about all the things in our world than we do. And he is always present and at work. So our task as followers of Jesus is to commit ourselves to learning from him how to become peacemakers in our world, and then let God use our peaceful acts to sow the seeds of justice in the world around us that desperately needs his peace. Would you guys stand with me? We're going to end today by praying together out loud a historic Christian prayer. It's often attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, and this is a prayer that I've returned to for decades now, over and over again, when I just can't find the words to say, when I'm feeling overwhelmed. And I think it's particularly apt as we head out this week to do the hard work of peacemaking in our communities. Let's pray this together. Oh, do we have that up there? No, we don't have it. Okay, guys, I'm going to pray that prayer. Sorry about that. Okay. Lord, make us an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let us bring love. Where there is offense, let us bring pardon. Where there is discord, let us bring union. Where there is error, let us bring truth. Where there is doubt, let us bring faith. Where there is despair, let us bring hope. Where there is darkness, let us bring your light. Where there is sadness, let us bring joy. O Lord, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that one receives, it is in self-forgetting that one finds, it is in forgiving that one is forgiven, it is in dying that one awakes to eternal life. Amen.